Joining me is Ghana's President-elect, John Dramani Mahama. Hello, sir. Thanks for making the time. Congratulations on the historic, emphatic victory. Ghanaians have given you a second chance to become president. How does that make you feel?
Oh, well, it just makes me feel the weight of responsibility. And looking at the faces of the young people I saw at all the rallies and the high expectation they have in our government, it gives me a humble feeling and a sense of preparing to give it my best so that I can turn this country around and create a better future for our young people. I call it resetting Ghana. We need a reset so that we can create a better environment for our young people to thrive and create enough opportunity for them to be able to realize their full potential.
Right. It's interesting you've mentioned that word again, reset, because that's what you have pledged to do. What exactly do you mean by reset Ghana?
You get to a point where your telephone or your computer program becomes corrupted and it freezes. You need to reset so that it can begin to work again. We've been implementing our democracy and our governance systems for many years now, since 1992. And I think that the time has come for us to reset our governance, reset our economic management issues, and reset our attitudes in order that we can build the Ghana that we all want together.
Right. But for those listening, it's still the word reset. Can you take us through one or two ways you want to reset?
Well, one, that we improve on efficiency in governance. And one of the things we need to do is to carry through the constitutional review that stalled after this government came into place. There are many issues that we need to deal with in our constitutional governance and also in our governance activities. And so one of the first things we'll do would be to take the whole issue of constitutional review again and see how we can structure things so that we have a more dynamic constitution going forward. Aside from that, we need to take the fight against corruption and waste to a new level. And so how do we improve our governance system so that we're not having so much waste as a result of corruption and waste? And so that's something that we need to look at. How do we look at our economic management in the sense that our economic managers are able to manage it in such a way that we don't end up where we have found ourselves this time, for instance, in terms of debt management. One of the key things we're looking at is to set up a more transparent debt management authority so that Ghanaians know what debts are being accrued on their behalf and whether they're going into the things that Ghanaians deem essential or they're just being piled on because somebody is making a profit out of it. We're also going to establish a system for recovering any ill-gotten wealth or misappropriation of government properties or landed property that anybody has taken, so that we set a new standard of accountability in governance. If people want to serve in government, they must be prepared to account to the public for their service. And so we're not only going to hold the outgoing governments accountable, we're going to hold people who serve in this new government to the same standards of accountability that will hold the outgoing government.
Right. You've touched a lot on the economy, which obviously is currently the biggest issue. If you talk to a lot of Ghanaians, they are feeling the pinch, which leads me to this, because you've talked about implementing a 24-hour economy. What does that look like, and how do you hope to achieve that?
Well, I believe that you will understand what a 24-hour economy is. Ghana is not going to be the first to implement a 24-hour economy. There are several countries that have a 24-hour economy. And it covers public services, it covers the private sector, and it covers the entertainment and service industry. And so we're going to give incentives to people who can work longer hours, increase production, and be able to take on more employees, especially for a country like ours, where we have a youthful population of more than 60%. And so we need to do the things that will make sure that opportunities open up for them. And so we're going to give the incentives. We're going to roll out that policy as we promised in our 120-day plan. By the end of 120 days, we would have the full comprehensive 24-hour policy, which will incentivize the private sector to work longer hours, to increase their productivity, take advantage of the African Continental Free Trade Area to export into other African countries, take advantage of our existing AGOA agreements, take advantage of our agreements with the European Union so that we can increase productivity and export. Encourage foreign investors to come and set up in Ghana. You know that Europe and other parts of the world have aging populations, so labor is becoming a problem and becoming expensive. How do we attract those investors to bring those businesses here and run them 24 hours, 3 shifts a day, so that more young people in Ghana can get work to do? That is what it's all about. And within 120 days of coming into government, as promised in our manifesto, we're going to roll out the policy so that the private sector can see what is in it for them. And those who want to sign up will be able to do so. Aside from that, I'm going to chair an accelerated exports promotion program personally as president, in order that we're able to push exports so that we're not producing only for the Ghanaian market, but also for the wider international market.
Right. I mean, you've given yourself a timeline, first 120 days in office. I would hope to be the first person to talk to you and remind you, hey, 120 days are over. What have you achieved? But we'll give you some time before that. But, Mr. President-elect, let's look back at your previous term as president. The economy was struggling. I'm sure you'll be the first to say that. Frequent electricity blackouts made it even worse, affecting so many lives and businesses. Things were so bad you had to secure a $1 billion IMF loan in a bid to revive the economy. Your administration also suffered a number of corruption scandals. So why are you the man to lead Ghana again now?
Well, let me make a bit of a correction. I mean, people don't look at our end of term numbers. Our end of term numbers were good. For an election year in 2016, we ended with a budget deficit of 6.1%. We ended with, end of 2016, a debt to GDP ratio of less than 57% debt to GDP. We financed Government of Ghana budget, our budget that year, with 0 central bank financing. So the end of term numbers were good. You bought into that narrative that we left an economic mess. It's absolutely untrue. We handed over this economy to the administration that is just going out with predictions of 8% growth in 2017. And so the 8% growth in 2017 had absolutely nothing to do with the new government that came in. We brought on stream 2 new oil fields with fresh revenues from petroleum. We increased cocoa production to almost 1 million tons and brought in $2 billion into the economy. And so the narrative that we left an economic mess is wrong. That's first. But in addition, we have solved the energy crisis. I'm coming, just a minute. The energy crisis was a legacy issue. It was the lack of investment in generation over the years that crystallized into an energy crisis. I went to Parliament and I promised the nation that I was elected for a time like this and I was going to fix it. By December 2015, Ghana had no energy crisis. We had increased generation. We had put in the financial mechanisms for paying legacy debts. And so don't buy into that narrative. We had sorted things out by the time we left office.
So Mr. President-elect, obviously it's more than a narrative. If you talk to a lot of Ghanaians, they were not feeling this percentage growth you're talking about in their pocket. And, you know, some would even say now there are some economic figures that suggest that Ghana's current economy is strengthening slowly. There are some predictions about 7%, you know, economic growth under this current government that you've been bashing and saying they've not done a good job. So ending of anyone's term, there seems to be some sort of jump and some excitement when a new president-elect is about to come in. So, which is what you're saying. So you're not wrong to say that, but what the point is, or remains, it was still a serious economic challenge for many Ghanaians, and they weren't feeling the development you're talking about in their pocket. So my next question to you, Mr. President, will be, knowing all that you promised Ghanaians now, knowing all the challenges you faced, again, mentioned corruption issues and all of that, and you want to now stamp it out when you form your next administration. What is it that you've learned from your previous administration that you want to do differently this time around?
Well, one of the things we focused on in the previous administration was to put back the infrastructure. We had a huge infrastructure deficit in terms of roads, water, electricity, healthcare, and I mean, just name it. And so one of our focuses was to put the infrastructure back, but also believing that in investing in infrastructure, you stimulate the economy. And in stimulating the economy, you create jobs. And so, yes, we did create more than 300,000 jobs in the construction sector. And the construction sector carried along a whole of the economic value chain. One area that I think we would focus on and look at in this new administration is to look at issues to do with livelihoods. And so while we'll continue investments in infrastructure through the big push that we are advocating, we're also going to look at issues that affect livelihoods in the sense of the digital economy, in the sense of investing in fintech growth, investing in the pharmaceutical industry, investing in agricultural and agro-processing value chains. That is most important. And so, yes, we're going to look at infrastructure as a driver of growth, but we're also going to look at the larger picture of livelihoods so that we can create more jobs in all those other sectors. And so export, using Ghana Exim Bank, which we established before we left office, we're going to make sure the investments from Ghana Exim go into the critical sectors that will increase productivity and increase jobs for young people. We have the program we call the Jumara program, and that is a program to give young people the kind of capital and startup to be able to start small and medium enterprises. That whole thing was politicized and was given to political apparatchiki and others, while those who really needed it did not get it. And so we're going to look at that. Aside from that, we're going to look at not only piling on taxes as a means of raising revenue, but also looking on the expenditure side and cutting waste in government, reducing the number of ministers, reducing the number of appointees, so that we're able to bring the budget deficit within the target zone as quickly as possible.
Right, right. Ghanaians have shown time and time again that if they give any leader the chance to rule and they are not satisfied, they get them or their party out. So Ghanaians are really keenly listening to all these promises you're making. And we'll hope that you do, as you say, because then it benefits the country and everyone as a whole. So I would wish you all the best with that. But let's switch things a bit. In recent years, there's been a number of military takeovers in some African countries. We can talk about Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali. How can regional bodies like ECOWAS respond to that? I'm talking to you as someone who's served as the head of ECOWAS at some point.
Yeah, in my period as chair of ECOWAS, we didn't have crisis like this. In Burkina Faso, if you remember, there was the civil unrest that followed President Compaoré's attempt to extend his term in office, and the soldiers took over, if you remember. We handled it differently from the way the new crop of heads of states handled it. You always have the threat of sanctions, but you don't go ahead and implement. You keep that as a stick and a carrot in order to encourage them to agree on a transition program and eventually come back to civilian rule. And so what we did in Burkina Faso was, when that happened, as chair of ECOWAS, myself with President Macky Sall and President Yayi Boni, were dispatched to ECOWAS, by ECOWAS to go and speak to the new military leaders. We spoke to them, and we said, well, ECOWAS will be forced to impose sanctions if they didn't come out with a transition program. And so we called all the stakeholders, and eventually that's how come they agreed to a transition program to do a constitutional review, have a civilian president with the soldier as prime minister. So if you remember, President Kafando was elected as president, and the military leader became the prime minister. And they agreed on a transition program which prepared them for elections. And after those elections, Roch-Kabore was elected. And so I do think that we must use diplomacy to try and get them back into the fold. Coming as, should I say, a fresh leader, a new leader again, on my resurrection, I would give that face to ECOWAS to see how we can speak to our three other brotherly countries and see how we can draw them back close. They are feeling abandoned. They believe that ECOWAS is not supporting them. And I think that we must change that narrative.
Right. I mean, as you say, in all fairness, that's what Nigerian President Tinubu is trying to do. He said recently he's trying to use diplomacy to try to get those three countries back on track. So we'll have to wait and see how that goes. But are you concerned that, you know...
I'm going to support that.
Exactly right. So is Ghana more at risk because of the instability further north, you think?
Yes, we're at risk. Yeah, if you look at all the risk assessments, Ghana is quite there, and so we need to work as quickly as possible. There's an African proverb that says that when your neighbor's house is on fire, you help him to quench it. Otherwise, when it burns down his house, it will spread to your house. And so we need to give Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger all the support they need to deal with this crisis. Otherwise, it definitely would spread and come into our countries. Already, there are incursions in northern Togo. I'm sure you've heard about them. And so it's just a matter of time. And so we need to be very proactive.
Right. There are some reports even suggesting there's been incursions in northern part of Ghana where you're from. But I guess your whole point is that Ghana is at risk, as you say yourself, and we have to do all that we can to, prevent that situation. Youth unemployment remains high, and studies suggest that it's fueling violent extremism and radicalization, especially in the north. How do you plan to tackle that?
Well, I don't think that Ghana yet has reached that stage, but it is a worry, and if we don't do the things that will create opportunities for our young people, then we can have, that kind of situation on our hands. Incidentally, Ghana is a bit different in terms of the presence of the states and the better spread of development across our country than some of our neighbors. In every district in Ghana, we have electricity. In every district in Ghana, we have a portable water system. In every district, we have a local government office. We have a secondary school. We have hospitals. We have telecommunications facilities. And so people are not feeling as alienated from the state as they will feel in some other countries. There are many countries where you go, and apart from the biggest city and the second biggest city, third biggest city, there's nothing anywhere else. And so Ghana is a bit more resilient, but we cannot take that for granted. Our major hurdle is youth unemployment. If we do not grow our economy as fast as we should to give the private sector the opportunity to create jobs, then we can end up with that kind of situation. And that is why it's a matter of urgency that we stabilize the economy as quickly as possible, open Ghana for business again, invite foreign direct investment, set up the factories, expand the farms, provide incentives to farmers, provide agro-processing support so that we're able to create more opportunity for young people. And so it's an emergency that every government should deal with. And my government is a government in a hurry. We want dedicated and loyal people to occupy the positions that will roll out our program as quickly as possible.
Right. I'm going to let you go soon, Mr. President-elect, but I'm very glad you talked about not taking the situation in Ghana for granted, because even though generally compared to some other countries, you know, there's arguably enough potable water for people, and electricity generally is not a huge problem compared to most of the neighboring countries. There's still a lot to be done to make sure that many more Ghanaians, you know, have access to potable water, have constant 24/7 electricity. There's still a lot of concern. We've been talking about the issue of galamsey for a while. You've been quite vocal about it. The galamsey, that is illegal mining for our international audience, that's polluting water bodies, and so that's further damaging the little potable water already available. What is your key plan to address galamsey?
Well, one of the major mistakes this government did was to introduce the LI that allowed mining in forest reserves. Until this government came into office, there was a ban on mining in forest reserves. And so, according to the Ghana Forestry Commission, 37 forest reserves that were preserved have had incursions into them. And you can already tell, over the last 8 years, you can tell that there's something changing in the climate. The harmattan is more severe in places that didn't used to feel the harmattan as harshly as it did. With the agitation that took place, this government has sent an LI back to Parliament to try and reverse the situation and ban mining in forest reserves. If it is passed by Parliament before we come, then that would be a good thing. But if it isn't, we're going to go ahead and ban mining in forest reserves. And we're going to get the companies that are in the reserves to get out of the reserves. And then we're going to take action to restore those reserves. Aside from that, we're going to categorize small-scale mining better. We have just two categories, large-scale and small-scale. But with the introduction of heavy earth-moving equipment into the small-scale sector, they no longer are small-scale miners. They are medium-scale miners, because the destruction one excavator can do in a month is considerable. And so we're going to have small-scale artisanal mining, which is different from medium-scale mining. And so once we categorize them better, then we are able to regulate them in a much better way. Aside from that, we're going to introduce all the technology that is required in order that we reclaim the mined out lands. And already some countries have offered to provide us with the technology and the funding to re-level the lands, clean the water, and plant the trees back on the mined out land. So reclamation is going to be very big. It's going to create employment too, because the young people who have been involved in galamsey are going to be employed to grow the trees back on the mined out land. And so there's a lot that we can do with regards to the water bodies. We have to stop those who are on the rivers and using chemicals and washing, the effluent into the rivers. And so that is something that, unless we stop them and take those shark farm machines off the water, is going to continue to be a problem. And then aside from that, the large-scale mines have huge concessions, 60 miles square, and they know where they want to mine, where it is 0.5 grams to 1 gram per ton. They are not interested in where it is 0.25. And so how do we carve out parts of their huge concessions and then get responsible small-scale mining using the best technology to do sustainable mining? I think that will be another way we look at it.
Okay. Ghana's President-elect John Dramani Mahama. Thank you very much, sir, for having a chat with me. Ghanaians have voted you back into power. They wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.